Welcome to the Boxing Gossip channel. Please hit subscribe if you're new. As always, many thanks for taking the time to tune in. It's Monday evening when I'm recording this, just after about 7 o'clock. And I'm late to the party because this is my post-fight video for Errol Spence versus Lamont Peterson. Now, bit of a delay, had quite a busy weekend, so this is far from an instant reaction. By now, there's been a lot of coverage of this fight already put out there on YouTube, so probably this isn't going to be the most extended post-fight video that I do on the channel this year, but of course I wanted to cover it because it's a very relevant fight, and of course we covered it in the lead up to the fight as well. Errol Spence wins the fight. Lamont Peterson pulled out by his corner at the end of the 7th round after 7 complete rounds, and 7 complete rounds where you'd be hard pushed to really score Lamont Peterson a share of any of those 7 rounds. It was a good performance from Errol Spence against someone who I consider a very, very good fighter in Lamont Peterson. Now, as I said in my pre-fight coverage of this fight, there was a lot against Lamont Peterson going into this matchup. He was smaller, he had a lot less power, he was older, and he'd been substantially more inactive than Errol Spence. So, despite the fact I rate Lamont Peterson, and despite the fact that I think he's a good fighter, I kind of recognised in the lead up to this fight it was hard to pick him against a guy like Errol Spence because there was so much against him. I also talked at the fact that whilst Lamont Peterson was a versatile fighter, it would actually be quite hard with his attributes and with some of the advantages Errol Spence had. I sort of speculated it would be quite hard to come up with a game plan for Lamont Peterson to win this fight. Now, I watched the fight 2 days afterwards, and I watched it on my mobile phone screen. So, look, this is not a fight I've had on a 50-inch TV, watching in high definition. I've watched it late to the party. If you've seen it, you may have seen something that I have potentially missed. But I was disappointed that, for me, there wasn't really any approach whatsoever from Lamont Peterson to come up with a tactic to actually win this fight. He actually seemed to be standing at 3/4 range with Errol Spence for the majority of this fight. There wasn't a huge interest from Peterson in using his legs and using movement like we saw in the Danny Garcia fight. He was a bit more stationary than that. He was a bit less slick than that. And he was kind of almost in front of Errol Spence at 3/4 range. You know, he wasn't always on the inside. He wasn't this close to Errol Spence. He also wasn't on the outside. He wasn't at a distance where Errol Spence couldn't simply stick out his jab hand and catch Peterson. Instead, he was right at the end of Errol Spence's power punches, which you'd have to think would be absolute madness and would be the last place you'd want it to be. Errol Spence, a much bigger, taller man than Lamont Peterson, and it seemed to me that Spence was just able to catch him routinely. Spence used that jab throughout the fight, not really as a sort of, you know, Vladimir Klitschko type battering ram jab, but just as a rangefinder, just as a scoring punch, just as a way of getting that shot off to create the gaps and to create the space and create the room to land more of his power punches, which is really where Errol Spence is in his element. And yeah, he was able to do that. There were periods of the fight where Spence was fairly controlled, fairly patient, happy to work his jab, happy to have a look at Peterson. I thought he showed good patience. And then after 3 or 4 rounds, there were times where he kind of put the pedal to the metal, stepped on the gas, and, you know, tried to close down that range even further to more of an inside battle. By the time the 7th round came, Lamont Peterson was using a bit of movement. He was using his back foot game. But to be honest, for me, that was because he'd been hammered into submission a little bit. And he realised that his tactic of almost standing at the end of Errol Spence's work was landing, you know, was paying very, very little dividend and was not really giving him much of a chance of winning this fight. I've got to say I was disappointed in Lamont Peterson's performance. Not because I necessarily expected him to cause Errol Spence too many problems or because I expected him to beat Errol Spence, but because I at least thought Lamont Peterson would show up with a plan of attack, a route to cause Spence trouble, a route to ask Errol Spence questions. And I didn't actually see that from Lamont Peterson in this fight, which I found disappointing. You know, conversely, we've got to say that a lot of the credit for that has to go to Errol Spence. Spence put in a good performance. You know, I've already referred to his patience. I've referred to his jab. As we know, Spence, very, very good body puncher, very, very good fighter up close and on the inside. You know, a powerful, powerful hitter. He kind of broke Lamont Peterson down in this fight. He kind of ground him down with high output, with accuracy. with telling shots. You know, you didn't see Peterson as out on his feet. He didn't look at the end of the 7th round like Lamont Peterson was about to get sparked out by Errol Spence. But we know Lamont Peterson's a durable fighter who's mixed it at high levels for a long time. And, you know, he was surviving in there, but he wasn't really doing much to cause Errol Spence too many problems. But Spence handled it with professionalism, and to be frank, he handled it with ease. Peterson isn't the elite of welterweight. He's no Keith Thurman, etc. He's not even a Kell Brook, but he is a very good fighter. He's a top 10 level fighter, and Errol Spence showed levels above Lamont Peterson. I guess the big questions off the back of this fight is, where do we rate Errol Spence? How good is Errol Spence? You know, would we pick him over Keith Thurman? Would we pick him over Terence Crawford, etc.? My take on that is those are all fights that could go either way. Those are all fantastic fights. They're some of the best fights in the sport. And you stick any combination of those fighters in a ring together, I wouldn't be picking any one of them to win confidently. You know, I'd have my favourites, which I'll come on to in a mere moment, but I wouldn't be picking any of them to win confidently. I see them all as very, very competitive fights. Errol Spence, you look at the first half of that Kell Brook fight, and you think Kell Brook is winning that fight and actually pulling away at halfway. Keith Thurman, I'm still haunted by that Collazo fight where it looked like he got hurt by Collazo, and we must also acknowledge that guys like Danny Garcia and Sean Porter, despite the fact they're a very, very high level of opposition, were able to take multiple rounds of Keith Thurman. Terence Crawford, he looks like the ultimate fighter, to be honest, but we've also got to factor in that he's coming up another weight division. He's got very, very little form, if any form, at 147 pounds, and you know, that's a fairly substantial difference. You know, people say his best win is Gamboa. Well, the difference in size and power and durability between a Gamboa and an Errol Spence is night and day. So, whilst Terence Crawford appears to be the most complete and the most skillful, we've kind of got to see him at 147. We've got to see him in notable fights at 147 before we crown him as the king of that division. So you've got three guys who are very, very, very talented fighters. Thurman and Spence, huge guys at the weight, known as huge punchers, both undefeated. Terence Crawford, an undefeated guy, a complete technician, looks like he could go on to be an all-time great fighter. You know, the combination of the three of them is fascinating, and those are really, really excellent fights. For what it's worth, I'd probably pick Errol Spence to beat Keith Thurman. I could see it being either way. It's not a confident pick. I think Keith Thurman could be out-hustled by Errol Spence. You know, we look at the success that Danny Garcia and Sean Porter had against Keith Thurman. I think that Spence could bring that same pressure, but I think he could do it with more ferocity, more size, more power. And I think he's much more technically refined and much more educated on the inside and complex in terms of his boxing on the inside than a guy like Sean Porter. I now edge to Errol Spence over a guy like Keith Thurman. Although I do have concerns about Errol Spence getting clipped on the way in. We saw that consistently in the Kell Brook fight, and Thurman does have some decent power. A hell of a lot more power than a guy like Lamont Peterson, let's put it that way. So it's still a competitive fight. As for Terence Crawford, you know, you look at Crawford and you sometimes get the impression that this could be an unbeatable fighter. But for me, fighters are unbeatable, and then they go through weight divisions, and they go through weight divisions, and then they go through weight divisions, and sometimes they get found out. And maybe Crawford's big size advantages at 135 and 140, combined with his huge technical pedigree, have given him that image of invincibility. Maybe at 147, he may find it a lot more competitive and a lot more testing for him. Right now, if you had a gun to my head, I pick Crawford to beat both Thurman and Spence, and I pick Spence to beat Thurman. I look at both of those guys and I think they're exceptional talents, they're exceptional boxers, but I believe by a supreme technician they could be outboxed. And some of those punches that Errol Spence was eating against Kell Brook, and some of the momentum Kell Brook was getting in that fight in the first half of the fight, I think Terence Crawford would be able to do that to a higher level than Kell Brook. He may not have the strength of Kell Brook, he may not have the power of Kell Brook. I guess that will be a question. We'll have to see how he adapts to 147. But I believe he'd have superior movement potentially, and I believe potentially superior technique and likely superior defence. So for me, based on some of that success Kell Brook was having, I'd probably still side with Crawford. But I recognise it's an open question, and as I said with the disclaimer at the start, this is not a confident pick. This is not a life savings pick. Terence Crawford, has got to go improve himself at 147 now. Anyway, guys, that's me. I've ranted long enough about this topic. I said it was a short video at the start, and it hasn't turned out to be. But leave your comments. Let me know your thought on the Peterson fight. Let me know who wins in that welterweight triangle between Crawford, Thurman, and Spence. Comments in the section below. If you've enjoyed the video, please subscribe. Please hit the thumbs up button. As always, thanks for tuning in. Appreciate it.